that is mahti, playing their own mahti. According to these accounts, the improvised music provided a spiritual journey, sometimes lasting several hours. We have no recordings of this music. In 1882, some Karelian explorers had this kind of an experience in Olonets, Karelia. Having played a few dances, the man fell silent, claiming he knew no more. The kantele player was forgotten. There he sat alone in his corner, his kantele on his knees, staring in front of him. Gradually he began to play, softly, at times with a greater display of feeling and warmth, at others so that he was barely audible. On being told that this was precisely what we wished to hear and being asked what he was playing, he replied that it was nothing, that he was simply playing his own power. We therefore left him in peace, each going about our businesses, but the kantele player no longer asked any questions and being left to his own devices, played throughout the evening, and what a pleasure it was to listen to him. In addition to literal descriptions of kantele playing situations, we have some short and simple musical notations from the 19th century. And these mainly comprise dance music from that period, but there are also some runosong melodies and imitations of Orthodox church bells. The earliest known wax cylinder recording of Karelian kantele players date back to 1905 and 1906. In 1905, Armas Launis recorded a dance tune from Border Karelian Ivana Mishukka, as well as two dances from Ivana Shemekka. A wax cylinder recorded by Väinö Salminen in 1906 includes a dance tune played by Ivana Shemekka. He was a famous singer, sage, and kantele player. Folk music researcher Armas-Otto Väisänen made an invaluable work in 1916 and 1917 when he collected detailed information of the instruments, scales, playing technique, old tradition kantele players and their music in Border Karelia. He also took a short trip to Olonets, Karelia in 1919, and all these journeys involved wax cylinder recordings. Without his work, this tradition would have been lost. All collected information, as well as transcriptions and recordings, is kept at the Finnish Literature Society's Society Archive in Helsinki. Finally, modern culture, including education and Western music, reached Karelian villages too, and the larger kantele instrument with a new playing technique slowly replaced the old tradition at the turn and during the first decades of the 20th century. The Finnish Folk Music Institute began reviving the old kantele tradition in the 1980s. This was mainly based on the information and notations Väisänen published in the book Kantele and Joukko Tunes in 1928. Most of the music consists of popular dance tunes from that period, but there are also a few runosongs, shepherd tunes, and church bell imitations. Reviving ancient music like this is problematic when there is no way of hearing the original. Our culture has changed completely since the time of the Karelian kantele players, and it's clear that their musical aesthetics, like their way of life, were completely different to ours. For someone accustomed to playing music from written notation, the old kantele technique can be baffling at first. Compared to the musical staff, the instrument is facing the wrong way, with the shortest string closest to the player. Especially in older manuscripts, the tuning level of the instrument often does not correspond to the keys of the musical notation, but the music is transposed according to the tuning of the instrument in use. Alternating between the right and left hands with different fingering options on the scale can seem counterintuitive, and the technique requires quite a few repetitions before the brain accepts the idea of intertwining the fingers. After this, the player must internalize the idea of continuous transformation of music over time according to the musician's own associations. Musical notations, often just one or two line verses, are nothing more than a hint of the plot of a realized musical story. Not even accompanying sounds are always marked in the musical notation, let alone variations, although the polyphony of the music produced on the kantele was self-evident to everyone. The use of time signatures that were not part of the original music and the resulting placement of bar lines sometimes causes incorrect interpretations of verse structures. In addition, archive recordings show that the written rhythm is often adapted to the chosen time signatures in a simpler way than the original music was played. Even the scale of the musical notation does not represent the absolute truth, but musicians had and have the freedom to play the same musical idea at different times according to their mood, using a different scale. Today's musicians must also remember that the 19th century Karelian musicians of the oral runosong culture had never heard about equal temperament scale. As with sung music, in addition to the major and minor thirds of different sizes, the kantele also used a neutral third. Thus, there is a huge gap between the musical notation we use and the original music, just like there was a gap between the 19th century Finnish elite, the collectors, and the Karelians of the wilderness. And this is why I started the project of publishing the new transcriptions for musicians first, followed by the wax cylinder recordings. In 2009, I published a book about the 19th century kantele manuscripts, and in 2013, the book about the early 20th century manuscripts. The 3 wax cylinder albums were published in 2021, 23, and 25. These wax cylinder recordings have not been published earlier because most of them are of poor quality, with the sound of the instrument often barely recognizable. I decided to see if I could play along with them to make the original music more accessible to modern musicians and listeners, and at the same time, for me, it was a quest of trying to connect with the original musicians. From Väisänen's detailed notes, it was possible to find the information about each player's instrument, pitch, scales, tempo, and fingering, and thus it was possible to adjust the speed of the archive recording accordingly. Such information was not available for the earlier recordings by Launis and Salminen, so working with them relied on deduction and guesswork. The first album features the music of Teppana Jänis, a blind and landless man who supported himself by playing the kantele. The wax cylinder recordings were made by Väisänen in 1916 and 17, and the album was released as a free CD and can be listened to on digital platforms such as Spotify. It contains old and new recordings, partly overlapping. In addition to dance tunes, there is a church bell imitation, a runosong without the kantele, and one with the kantele accompaniment. Here's an example of a dance tune from the album. On the left, you can see the music as it was published in the Kantele ja Jouhikko-Sevelmiä book in 1928. On the right is my own notation, and this is what it sounds like. I think I want to, just a moment. The second album features the music of Ivona Mishukka, who already used a modern larger kantele but played it mainly with the old plucking technique. By changing the position of his hands on the kantele, he was able to use different scales. The album was released digitally on the Etnonet website, which showcases the publications of the Sibelius Academy's folk music department at Unions Helsinki. This album contains both the original unedited archive recording like 1A and edited versions featuring new recordings like 1B. The earliest recording made by Armas Launis dates from 1905, while the others were recorded by Väisänen in 1916 and 1917. The digital publication includes background information, details of each track, and transcriptions of tunes. The music includes dance tunes, church bell imitations, and two runosongs with the kantele. This example is one version of Maanitus dances that Misukka played. Väisänen didn't publish the transcription of this one because for some reason it was left incomplete. The draft in the archive contains variations of phrases, many of which lack accompaniment tones. Looking at this, you can understand the difficulty in combining the written music with the original tune. The third album features music performed by several kantele players. Like the previous one, it was only published digitally on the Etnonet website. The earliest recordings from 1905 and 1906 by Launis and Salminen are quite interesting again, since they also clearly demonstrate the differences between the published manuscript and the music itself. For example, in one tune, instead of repeating one phrase as written in the manuscript, the music consists of couplets. And in this example, Shemeikka changes the meter from 4 beats to 5 and back again, which is not shown in the original manuscript. Were you able to follow it? It was so fast. Okay. Okay. In this example, this is recorded by Väisänen in 1916. I'm struggling with the phrase structure because I feel it differs from the manuscript in this way. This is what I hear. So I think I'm running out of time. Okay, the last example is recorded by Väisänen in 1917. In Suojärvi, he met an old man, Jaakko Kulju. According to Väisänen, Kulju had a 16-string modern-style kantele in poor condition. Kulju tuned the high strings differently from the low ones to be able to get different scales when changing the hand position. He also used neutral thirds and changed the tune again, the scale again after a couple of days. And this is part of the Kisavirsi tune that Väisänen recorded from Kulju. so on. So it is clear that Väisänen listened to the wax cylinder several times while making the transcription, as it is now difficult to hear the music on it. However, the differences between the published transcription and the original music are clear. So even though the wax cylinder recordings are in such a bad condition and they are hard to listen to, I find them extremely important if we really want to understand the musical thinking of the original musicians. Like Dylan Robinson has stated, no language or written form is value-free. Forms of structural music analysis, for example, enact epistemic violence against indigenous music, blunting the life it carries. I wonder, what's the time?
Pretty much spoken for about 20 minutes, but if you have a couple more minutes,
Well, there's an interesting quote from Väisänen. He several decades later, after he made these recordings, he wrote how impossible it is to authentically transcribe this kind of music. And about meeting one kantele player, he wrote this. Many of us may have experienced the quiet exaltation of folk singers and musicians. I have noticed this in many kantele players. The player's fingers touch the strings according to the tune, but his eyes do not follow the activity. Instead, they are dreamily vacant. When an old man from Suojärvi was playing his endless dance tune in a log cabin as darkness fell, I took a picture, exposed the frame for quite a long time, and was amazed that he neither blinked nor paid any attention to my photography whatsoever. He had fallen into his world of quiet playing. Gradually, as the same tune continued with constant variations, his body began to fall against the table, his eyelids closed, the old man playing as if in sleep. Although I was listening with the curious ears of an obdurate transcriber, I felt enchanted. After this experience, it was easy to believe the old man Onoilo when he told me about a man from Olonetsia, Karelia, who could play so sadly that he made his listeners cry, and so joyfully that he made them dance. And, for example, Kulju, he played the same phrase with constant variations for several hours during Väisänen was there, and when Väisänen came back 3 days later, Kulju was still playing the same tune. So he didn't have any songs, he had only music. It's a very different way of thinking of music than we have. Okay, that's it. Thank you.
thanks very much.